Somewhere over the Persian Gulf right now, a missile is traveling at 15 times the speed of sound. It is not a theory. It is not a simulation. It is a real object, made of real metal, carrying a real warhead, and your billion-dollar radar system has exactly 4 seconds to figure out what to do about it. 4 seconds. That is less time than it takes you to read this sentence out loud. And in those 4 seconds, the entire concept of Western military supremacy, the doctrine that has defined global power since 1945, begins to crack. The Fateh hypersonic missile. The Iranians did not announce this weapon in a press conference. They announced it in the sky. Mach 15. That is roughly 18,000 kilometers per hour. For context, a commercial airliner cruises at about 900 kilometers per hour. The fastest conventional jet fighter on the planet, the F-22 Raptor, tops out near Mach 2.2 inches, a full military power sprint. The Fateh travels nearly 7 times faster than that. And here is the detail that the Pentagon briefers are quietly losing sleep over. It does not fly in a straight line. The terminal phase of this missile involves maneuvering. It adjusts its trajectory. It dances. And a dancing target moving at 18,000 kilometers per hour is not a missile defense problem. It is a physics problem, and physics does not care about your defense budget. Let us talk about the geography, because geography is everything in this story. Pull up a map of the Middle East. Find the Persian Gulf. Now trace the narrow waterway at its southern end, the point where the Gulf squeezes down to about 33 kilometers at its narrowest passage. That is the Strait of Hormuz, 33 kilometers of water separating Oman from Iran. On any given day, roughly 21 million barrels of oil pass through that strait. That is approximately 20% of the world's entire oil supply. Every tanker heading from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, the UAE, Qatar, they all pass through that 33-kilometer choke point. Iran sits on the northern shore. Iranian missile batteries, coastal defense units, naval assets, and now confirmed hypersonic launch platforms are all within easy striking distance of every single vessel that transits that water. Now put a United States Navy aircraft carrier in that picture. The USS Gerald R. Ford class. $20 billion of American military power. It is the largest warship ever built. It carries roughly 90 aircraft. It requires a crew of approximately 5,000 sailors. It projects American power across the entire region. And it is operating within range of the Fateh hypersonic system right now. That is not speculation, that is geography. And geography does not lie. Here is where the politicians step in front of the cameras. Here is where the narrative machine starts working. The defense secretary stands at the podium and says the words you have heard before. Our air defense system successfully intercepted incoming threats. Our Patriot batteries performed as designed. The Iron Dome maintained its operational effectiveness. The region remains secure. Our forces are protected. And the journalists write it down, and the anchors repeat it, and the markets open green the next morning because the story has been managed. But let us now invite physics to the press conference. The Patriot missile defense system is an extraordinary piece of engineering. It genuinely is. It was designed in the 1980s, updated through multiple variants, and the most current version, the PAC-3, has a real kill probability against certain threat categories. Against a slow-moving Scud missile from 1970s technology, it performs well. Against cruise missiles flying at subsonic speeds, it has demonstrated effectiveness. The system uses a phased array radar called the AN-MPQ-65 to track incoming threats. The radar is fast, it is powerful, it costs over $1 billion per battery when you include all the components. But here's what happens when you point that radar at a Mach 15 hypersonic vehicle in the terminal phase. The radar has to detect the object, calculate its trajectory, predict where it will be in the next few seconds, and hand that solution off to an interceptor missile. The interceptor then has to physically reach the target. The PAC-3 interceptor travels at approximately Mach 5. You are trying to intercept a Mach 15 object with a Mach 5 interceptor. The geometry of that engagement window is brutal. You are not shooting at where the missile is. You are shooting at where it will be. And when that missile begins its terminal maneuvering, that prediction becomes worthless. The firing solution dissolves. The interceptor chases a ghost. The warhead arrives. And this is before we get to the plasma problem. When an object travels through the atmosphere at hypersonic speeds, the friction with the air generates extreme heat. The vehicle becomes surrounded by a plasma sheath. That plasma is electrically charged. That plasma absorbs and scatters radar signals. The very radar energy you are sending to track the missile gets eaten by the plasma surrounding it. Your billion-dollar radar goes partially blind exactly at the moment the missile is closest to its target. The engineers have a term for this. They call it radar blackout during re-entry. The Iranians did not invent this problem. The Americans discovered it themselves when they were building intercontinental ballistic missiles in the 1960s. The physics has not changed. The plasma is still there. The radar is still blinded. The missile still arrives. The Israeli government has invested enormously in layered defense. The Iron Dome handles short-range rockets. David's Sling handles medium-range threats. The Arrow 3 system handles ballistic missiles at exoatmospheric altitudes, meaning above the atmosphere, in space, before re-entry. The concept is elegant. You intercept the threat at every possible layer. You create so many opportunities to kill the incoming weapon that nothing gets through. Except the Arrow 3 has a specific design sweet spot. It works best against ballistic missiles that follow a predictable high arc into space and then fall back down. Against a hypersonic glide vehicle that never goes to space, that hugs the upper atmosphere, that maneuvers continuously, the engagement geometry is fundamentally different. Israeli defense officials, when speaking in technical forums rather than press conferences, have acknowledged this gap. They call it a capability seam. What that phrase means in plain language is, we have a class of threats that our current systems were not fully designed to address. What does it cost to find out your defense network has a seam? The answer is measured in destroyed infrastructure and the sudden silence on the other end of the radio when a base stops responding. Now let us do the math that nobody on television is willing to do. This is the arithmetic of the war of attrition, and it is the most important calculation of this entire conflict. One PAC-3 interceptor missile costs approximately $4 million. One Iranian Shahed 136 loitering munition drone costs approximately $20,000. That is a cost ratio of 200 to 1. $200 spent attacking for every $1 spent defending. Now Iran has demonstrated the ability to launch drone swarms. Not one drone, not 10 drones. Swarms of hundreds of drones, simultaneously, from multiple directions. To intercept a swarm of 200 drones, you fire 200 PAC-3 interceptors. That is $800 million in defense spending to neutralize $4 million in offensive spending. The attacker spends $4 million, the defender spends $800 million. Now add the hypersonic missiles into the swarm. You are not just dealing with the drones anymore. The drones are the distraction. They are the noise that saturates the radar, the targeting computers, the fire control operators. While your defense network is processing 200 drone tracks simultaneously, the Fateh hypersonics are already in the terminal phase. The system is overwhelmed before the main threat even arrives. Military planners call this saturation attack. You do not have to defeat the defense system technologically. You flood it. You overwhelm its processing capacity. You give it more problems than it can solve simultaneously, and then you send the weapon that actually matters through the gap. The United States has spent since 2001 over $2 trillion on military operations in the Middle East region. The number is staggering, $2 trillion. That includes the cost of the wars, the cost of the bases, the cost of the carrier groups, the cost of the Patriot batteries, the cost of the logistics chains that keep it all running. Iran's entire annual defense budget is somewhere in the range of $10 to $15 billion per year. Iran has been fighting this asymmetric war for decades, specifically designing cheap, effective weapons that exploit the cost imbalance. The Fateh hypersonic program, the drone swarm capability, the coastal missile batteries, these are not accidents. They are the logical endpoint of a strategic calculation that says you do not need to match American spending. You need to make American spending inefficient. The Strait of Hormuz does not need to be physically blocked to destroy global oil markets. It only needs to be perceived as dangerous. The moment the first commercial tanker captain looks at the insurance rate for transiting the strait and decides the cargo is not worth the risk, the oil stops moving. Insurance underwriters in London, in the Lloyd's market, they watch military escalation in real time. When Iranian missile capabilities are demonstrated against defended military targets, those underwriters raise war risk premiums on commercial shipping. When those premiums rise past a certain threshold, shipping companies reroute or stop sailing. The alternative route around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa adds approximately 15 days to the voyage from the Persian Gulf to European ports, 15 extra days of fuel, 15 extra days of crew costs, 15 extra days of delayed delivery. That cost gets added to every barrel of oil that takes the long route, and that cost gets passed to you. The math on oil is straightforward. Right now, Brent crude is trading at a certain price. Every analyst with a terminal knows that a sustained Hormuz disruption scenario adds somewhere between $30 and $70 per barrel to that price, depending on the duration and severity. At the higher end of that range, you are looking at oil prices that have not been seen since the worst of the 2022 energy crisis. Fuel prices at the pump follow crude oil with a lag of approximately 10 to 14 days. So when you fill up your car 2 weeks from now, you will be paying, in part, for the decision made in a missile launch facility in western Iran. But gasoline is actually the simple part. The supply chain impact goes deeper. Petrochemicals are the feedstock for plastics. Plastics are in everything. Medical equipment, food packaging, electronics components, construction materials, fertilizer production depends on natural gas, and natural gas prices are correlated with oil. When food production costs rise, grocery prices follow. The inflation that gets generated by a sustained oil shock is not limited to the energy sector. It permeates the entire economy through hundreds of indirect pathways: your grocery bill, your prescription medication costs, the price of the phone in your pocket. All of it is downstream from a 33-kilometer strait in the Persian Gulf. Go back to October 1973, the Arab oil embargo. The OPEC nations cut off oil exports to the United States and other Western countries that had supported Israel in the Yom Kippur War. In the United States, the price of oil quadrupled within months. Gas stations had lines stretching around blocks. Odd-even rationing was implemented, meaning you could only buy gas on certain days depending on your license plate number. The economy went into stagflation, a combination of high inflation and stagnant economic growth that took years to recover from. That embargo was not a missile strike. It was not a military action. It was simply the decision to restrict the flow of oil through a supply chain. The economic damage was catastrophic. Now consider that the 1973 scenario involved a political decision that could theoretically be reversed by another political decision. What we are describing today involves physical military capability demonstrated and real to threaten the transit routes themselves. The threat is not a political embargo. The threat is a Mach 15 missile traveling toward a supertanker. A political embargo can be ended by a phone call. You cannot phone call away a hypersonic missile. The carrier group in the Gulf is not there for decoration. It is a message. American aircraft carriers have been the ultimate message of deterrence for 80 years. When a crisis emerges anywhere in the world, the first question from the White House Situation Room has always been, where are the carriers? The carrier is the physical embodiment of the statement, the United States will project power anywhere on Earth, and you cannot stop us. That statement has been the foundation of the post-World War II international order. Every alliance, every security guarantee, every treaty, every trade relationship that the United States has built since 1945 rests on that foundation. A hypersonic missile capable of threatening a carrier does not merely threaten the ship, it threatens the statement. It challenges the foundational premise. If you can credibly argue that a $20 billion aircraft carrier is vulnerable to a $10 million hypersonic missile, then the calculation of deterrence shifts. Not because the carrier is destroyed, but because the uncertainty is introduced. Because the enemy now has a plausible path to sinking it. Because the admirals now have to think about survivability in ways they did not have to think about before. And that uncertainty propagates outward. It reaches the allies who were relying on that carrier as their security guarantee. It reaches the adversaries who were deterred by that carrier. Everything recalculates. Sun Tzu wrote that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. The hypersonic missile program is not about the battles Iran is planning to fight. It is about the battles it is preventing the United States from initiating by making the cost of action suddenly and dramatically higher. It is a deterrence weapon. It is a message weapon. And the message it sends is, your carrier is not invulnerable. Your defense network is not impenetrable. Your military guarantee to your allies is not unconditional. Come into this region prepared to pay a price you have not had to pay before. The officials who stood at the podium and said the words, "We can protect you," they are looking at classified intelligence reports right now that contradict those words. They are reading technical assessments from defense analysts who are telling them what the physics has always implied. The gap between what we promise and what our systems can deliver against this specific threat category is real, it is measurable, and it is growing. They are preparing contingency plans. They are adjusting deployment postures. They are having conversations behind closed doors that sound nothing like the press conference statements. And the 14 days are already counting down. The shipping companies are watching, the insurance markets are recalculating, the oil traders are positioning. The grocery distributors have not noticed yet, but they will. The gas station manager in Ohio has not heard about the Fateh missile program, but his prices will know about it before the end of the month. History is being written in real time. The distance between what politicians say and what weapons do has never been wider. The physics of a Mach 15 re-entry vehicle does not care about press releases. The cost ratio of a swarm attack does not care about defense budget appropriations. The 33 kilometers of the Strait of Hormuz does not care about diplomatic assurances. The world you are waking up to today is measurably different from the world of 6 months ago. The weapons have changed, the doctrine has changed, the The calculations have changed. Whether the conversation you are having with yourself has changed is entirely up to you. Pay attention.